Hi, I'm Charlie Burbank from Calais, Vermont.
Hello, I'm Martin McMahon from Barre, Vermont.
Okay, the reason we're doing this program is about so-called affordable housing. And over the last 20 years or so, as I've looked into this stuff, and I don't get paid to do it, I'm a carpet installer and I sell firewood, but things kind of snowballed and I got more interested and decided that it's not affordable at all for the people that are supplying the money.
Well, Charlie, what's this whole story about affordable housing not being affordable? How does that work?
Well, I got into this way back, I think about 1992 when a block in Hardwick burned. And I read in the Hardwick Gazette where, I believe it was the Vermont Community Development was going to grant Hardwick $405,000 to try and help fix the burned out block out. And then I read that Hardwick had loaned the money to, I believe it was the Northeast Community Development Corporation. I can't remember because there was also the Northeast Community Investment Corporation and the Northeast Community Management Corporation, and there was another one too. You know, it's just a bureaucratic mess. So I went up there to see, because they also said that the loan was going to be a 30-year balloon payment, 2% interest. So I'm going, wait a minute, 30-year balloon payment, that means they're not going to make a payment for 30 years and they're going to make one big lump sum with the 2% interest?
Charlie, can you explain to me, how does a balloon payment work? How does that work?
Well, from what I've been able to gather, the money just keeps accumulating. At the end of 30 years, you give this one big lump sum, in this case, to the town of Hardwick, so they could loan it out again.
So Hardwick was supposed to get the money after 30 years.
With the interest.
With the interest. Is that how it turned out?
No. So I drove clear up to St. Johnsbury, and I remember the lady's name, Christine Owery, and I was curious as to how much of the rent money they were setting aside every month to be able to make that rather large payment to the town of Hardwick. And she just flat out said, we're not setting any money aside. And I said, well, how are you going to pay the loan back? She says, we're not. I said, what do you mean you're not? She says, we're going to refinance it. And I'm going, huh? Never heard of this.
So refinancing the loan, does that mean that they don't pay any interest on the loan?
They don't pay the balance back, they don't pay the interest. I think they were supposed to pay the interest possibly, but I can't get straight answers from anybody. So I'm going, geez, they refinanced it. Town of Hardwick could use that money. So when the 30-year period went up to 2022, I went to the select board saying, you know, you could use that $405,000 payment plus whatever the interest made it bigger to loan out to somebody else. Well, there was only one old Vermonter on the board. All the rest of them are people that had moved up there, and they didn't seem to think it was any big deal or anything. I guess money to them was no project, so they just refinanced the loan. So then I kept digging on it. Vermont Housing Conservation Board here is the one that the state gives the money to for affordable housing plus conserving land, like the Vermont Land Trust.
So that money that board gives for these projects, where does that money come from?
The one in Hardwick came from the state of Vermont, the Community Development Corporation, as I remember.
So that would be our tax money?
Your tax money, or our tax money, yeah. And they didn't seem to be concerned about it, so I kept digging on certain other things, and I'm going to read you, well here, I've got a sheet from Vermont Housing Conservation Board because I asked them years ago for their first 5 years of their loans that they gave out. And I was new at this. And this one here is dated 1989. Northgate Apartments, The grantee was Northgate Nonprofit. The original amount was $2.9 million, which now would probably be about $29 million. And the maturity date is 12/31/51. 2051. I'm going to be dead by then. Those apartments are probably going to be torn down by then. Current terms, deferred to maturity. Comments, nothing. This is just one page of their stuff, of their so-called loans that they give out. That's your tax dollars. And they come from various sources, federal government, state government, town government. Deferred to maturity, converted to grant, diverted to maturity, converted to grant. Principal and interest fully paid, 2009, that was $100,000. Then converted to grant, deferred to maturity, paid in full, 1992, that was $22,000, peanuts. Deferred to maturity, converted to grant, on and on and on. And they will say that a good percentage of their loans are paid back, but I think if you look, they're the little peanut loans. They're not the big ones. They keep refinancing them, and they keep asking for more money from the legislature and the federal government. It used to be HUD, Housing and Urban Development, way back, used to loan the money to private developers, a 20-year loan with an interest rate, and once the private developer paid the loan back, plus the interest, he owned the building, just like your house, if you pay the mortgage off.
So at this point, if these things are deferred to maturity or granted, who owns the property at that point?
They do,
The board does.
whoever the nonprofit is,
Okay.
they own it.
Now, I understand what a grant is. A grant means money is given
Yes,
with no intent to have it repaid back. It was like a gift. It's given.
correct.
Right? What's deferred to maturity indicate?
That means you don't have to make a payment until the maturity date, like that one I mentioned, Northgate Apartments, 2051. There's another one here, 2045, 2030, but that was way back 1990. Here's another one, 2037. Here's one, 2063, 2042.
So in all these cases, taxpayer money is being used, but the taxpayers are not getting any benefit from this.
Not the ones that are supplying the money, no.
Okay.
And back to HUD, when you paid the loan back with the interest, you owned the building, and then the affordable housing rent, you could raise it. Mm-hmm. But with the leftist governments that moved in here in Vermont, they said that, well, it didn't stay in affordable housing, they raised the rents. They don't happen to mention that the government got the money back with the interest so they could loan it out again, like a revolving loan fund. So now they just keep coming up to state legislature or the federal government saying, hey, we need more money for affordable housing.
So this sounds like the people supplying the money, the taxpayer, through various government agencies, are sending this money down through, and it's not being watched over. There's not any accountability for this. Is that correct?
That's the way I look at it. I've been up the legislature, I've been talking to this, but I make a comparison to like EB5, this scandal up there in the Northeast Kingdom. I'm not saying the misappropriation of money here, but to get where I'm getting at, let me read a opinion editorial column when I talked to Mike Smith, who used to be, at the time he was hosting a radio program, WDEV in Waterbury, Vermont, and he used to be the Secretary of Administration under Governor Jim Douglas. And I'd talked to him about this, and he went and researched it, and I knew nothing about this, but he wrote this and put this in the major papers in the state. It's called Judging from Appearances. Charles Burbank works 2 jobs because he says it's a necessity in order to make ends meet in Vermont. He wears the clothes of a laborer, loose-fitting, worn, and of rugged material. His job installing carpets and flooring, but he also cuts and sells firewood. He has the weathered face of a man that has seen both good times and bad. He speaks in rapid and unfiltered bursts, with words that may be threatening or intimidating to some. Because of his appearance and some of his mannerisms, he can easily be dismissed or ignored, and often is. Many interpret his passion as nothing more than an obsession run amok. But if you look past the persona and his sometimes off-putting antics, he has a public policy point that may have merit. For nearly 20 years, Mr. Burbank has been highly critical about the operation of the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. VHCB is a statewide nonprofit organization dedicated to financing affordable housing as well as land and water conservation projects. It gets a healthy annual multi-million-dollar appropriation from state coffers to disperse funds for such projects. On the housing side, VHCB provides loans to other state housing agencies and local nonprofits to build more affordable housing. According to its 2015 audited financials, VHCB has approximately $191.5 million of outstanding loans and interest due back to it when these loans mature. But here's Mr. Burbank's point. Much of the money will never be paid back to VHCB over the course of the normal 30-year loan. And he contends there is little effort to demand repayment for the bulk of the loans. In fact, there is no effort to require borrowers to have a reserve for loan payments. Instead, when loans come due, they are simply rolled over for another 30 years or so. So VHCB's trust fund, is seldom repaid, is support future projects. Instead, the organization relies mostly on annual state appropriations to fund new projects. Burbank contends that VHCB loans have the look and feel of a grant. If true, then VHCB's $195 million in loans listed in assets in reality have little or no value. If these loans were paid back on a timely basis as outlined in the original loan documents, then a portion of the annual VHC appropriation could be used elsewhere. Excuse me. For example, cleaning up our waterways, or used to fund more VHCB qualified housing projects. This year, the governor is proposing $32 million in new state money going to VHCB. Gustav Seelig, executive director of VHCB, wrote in a memorandum to the Vermont House Committee on General Housing and Military Affairs in 2016 that these projects were low-income Vermonters and their limited ability to increase rents to cover debt service. Because income is not kept up with living expense over the years and the cost of construction and maintenance to increase energy efficiency in properties and to build higher standards is more expensive than the other housing projects, the repayment of debt isn't practical in many circumstances. Extending a loan when certain conditions are met allows the board to provide an additional 15 to 30 years of affordability. Is generally far less expensive than the cost of replacement housing according to Seelig. Yet a report produced in 2009 by the Agency of Administration entitled Enhancing Investments in Affordable Housing reviewed the operations of Vermont's entire nonprofit housing sector and wrote that income data provided by VHCB indicates material growth in the cumulative incomes of affordable housing occupants, thus seemingly contradicting VHCB's assertion. Although the report was limited because of the number of loans they had access to and the time period of the loans in the sample case that the author selected, incomes grew at an annual rate of 6.5%, indicating that higher rents could be applied to some renters. A portion of the increased rent money could be used to offset expenses or build a debt service reserve fund. The report also highlighted that total expenditures grew substantially for most state and nonprofit housing entities between the years 2005 and 2008, with personal services increasing at a compounded annual rate of 5.82% for state housing organizations and 11.2% for local nonprofit housing entities. The report indicates their financial capacity to repay debt, but rather than repay loans or contribute to a reserve fund, money was expended elsewhere, especially in personnel costs. Another key question is whether these loan extensions that can be up to another 30 years, 60 years total, qualify as a loan under the Internal Revenue Service definition of a bona fide loan. The question is important because federal tax credits are used in conjunction with these loans to fund housing projects. According to IRS, their test for a bona fide loan is this. The key inquiry is not whether certain indicators of a bona fide loan exist or do not exist, but whether the parties actually intended and regarded the transaction to be a loan. An essential element of bona fide debt is whether there exists a good faith intent on the part of the recipient of the funds to make repayment and a good faith intent on the part of the person advancing the funds to enforce repayment. BHCB is relying in part on opinions from its own legal counsel as well as outside bond counsel to say their loans are bona fide even though they are refinanced for extended periods with no principal or interest repaid or loan reserves created. Kutak Rock LLP is a well-known legal firm in the area of debt financing. It opined in 2010 for the Vermont Housing Finance Agency that our experience nationally is that some housing agencies and nonprofit lending organizations will routinely review the status of a loan at or near its maturity with a view to facilitating the continuance of a project as an affordable housing project. Decisions made at the time by a state agency or nonprofit corporation with respect to such a loan, enforcing payment at maturity, refinancing, extending the maturity, or even forgiving all or a part of the principal or interest therein, will not adversely affect the determination made at the time of making the loan as to whether the loan is truly a loan for federal tax purposes. In the end, only the IRS can be sole determinant of what qualifies as a bona fide loan, but BHCB says it places faith and trust in legal opinions. What Mr. Burbank has done to raise public policy questions that should be either dismissed or pursued by the governor or legislature based on its merits and not solely on the appearance of the person representing them. Perhaps Mr. Burbank's information will prove to be meritless, or perhaps a public policy decision will override his concerns, but nonetheless, his concerns warrant serious inquiry.
So Charlie, let me ask you a question right now. I noticed in there you said that some of the researchers had trouble accessing some of the information that they required for their research. Have you ever had trouble trying to access information from these organizations?
Yeah, just within the last month, Down Street Housing in Barre, Vermont, the nonprofit in this area, had the Barre City Police. They called me and told me I had to show up down there and get a notice of trespass. I couldn't ask them any more questions. And I'd only been in there twice. You were there the first time. And the questions we wanted to know the square footage on these so-called affordable housing apartments in Waterbury, Marsh Place, that was in the Washington World. And I don't know, what was it that day? Nobody was there or something. And I went down again by myself, and I know they said they were all down in Washington, D.C., and then I got a notice of trespass, so I couldn't get the information. I wanted to know the square footage of those apartments because it's, amongst all the funding they got, it totals $15.3 million. And there's 26 apartments. That's just shy $600,000 an apartment, and they're sharing roofs, ceilings, floors, walls, It's a block building. $600,000, and that's affordable housing that these so-called affordable housing groups are doing. There's a place in Washington County right now, a developer is building 1,500 square foot buildings on a separate lots with a 2-car garage, and they're $600,000. Why is all these affordable housing projects in the state of Vermont costing 2 to 2.5 times what the private sector can do it for?
So essentially, they're overpricing the work that's going to be done in these places.
The money is, you can't get answers to this stuff. Like I got a notice of trespass here, the Vermont Housing Authority years ago put a notice of trespass on me. I don't go out of my way to look this stuff up. When I'm in the area, I go dig at it. And they don't want to talk about it. And the reason they put the notice of trespass is because one of their employees is apt to tell me something they shouldn't, and then I go flying with it. But no, I just get frustrated here when I see the cost of this. I have no problems with the people that are in there, but it does make me wonder why we need so much affordable housing when I think I heard on the radio this spring or something that we lost 20,000 people in the state of Vermont. We went from 640,000 to 620 or something like that. If we're losing all these people, what do we need more affordable housing for? Why can't the private sector build these here? Because this affordable housing groups have got them all tied up. And
another point of interest for me is the fact that it's so difficult to get information and it's so complicated. It shouldn't be very complicated. It's basically a loan transaction. And yet it seems to be a lot of hurdles in the way of trying to access all the information required.
yeah, and the way the money is allocated from different places and dispersed in different places. And sometimes I think about it like the cocaine cartel, for crying out here, it's laundering money. So you can't follow it to see where it's going. And sometimes I wonder also, who learned from who? Did the cocaine cartel learn from the state government, or did the state government learn from the cocaine cartel? To wash all this stuff out, so finally you just give up. But I'm not giving up. I see something wrong, I go there. And over the years, I'm self-employed, and I have to file a tax return with the IRS every year. And I forget what the name of the place was in Burlington. That's a nonprofit. It was on, I think, St. Paul Street. And I requested their tax return because they're a 501c3. And they, back then, I don't know if you still do, they have to let you see it if you walk in the office and they got more than 3 employees to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing with a nonprofit. Well, they gave me a copy of it, and I went home and I started looking at it, and I'm good with numbers. And basically I look at revenue and I look at expenses. And under the expenses, I was looking under this column here, and it listed all the things I spent it on. And this here was for, I forget, project-based, and this here was for administration or whatever. And it dawned on me, wait a minute. Everything in this line is 80%, and this is 20%, and the whole column about 20, every one of them's 80%, 20%. They never even kept track. If I did that on my tax return, the bells and the whistles and stuff would be going off all over the place. So I went up there to ask, I forget what his first name was. I had to punch a keyboard or something. I'm not used to fancy stuff like that, to get in. And his name was Broderick. I can't remember his first name. And I asked him about it, and he says, so what? We're a nonprofit. Nobody cares about that. And I'm looking, you made all this stuff up, and the head gal was Kathy Gannon of the CFO, Chief Financial Officer. She was making, at that time, I think $88,000 a year. And I'm thinking, gee, that's a job, and you ain't even got to do this. You just guess 80% of your total. And they probably guessed on the, here, it's a financial audit. A financial audit, all you need is the numbers to add up. A performance audit is you got to prove that that's where you spent the money.
Right.
So I went to the auditor of accounts down here. I don't know, I went to 3 of them over the years. And basically I said, we don't audit nonprofits. That's the board of directors problem. And I'm looking at the board of directors, and they're all like-minded people that are running the organization and everything. But one, I think when Brock, up in, where is he, up in St. Albans County, Milton, he was there, he did check on it, and he had somebody send me another tax return about 8 years later, and it said, well, it must be all right because they're still doing it. And they gave me that tax return 8 years later, and they were still doing 80-20. It makes me kind of wonder what's going on. It's like that what I mentioned earlier, that EB5 project up there. Nobody got involved with that because the federal money was coming into the state, and the state was dispersing it out, and the state was supposed to be overseeing what they were doing with it. And all of a sudden, some bell or whistle went off, and the feds wanted to know what all this EB5 money gets spent on and everything, and all of a sudden we got major problems. And this was 10 years ago, I think. And I think they're just getting it settled now. But I'm not saying there's fraud or embezzlement or anything here, but if the IRS says it's supposed to be a loan, it's not supposed to be converted to be a grant. It's supposed to be paid back. This is low-income housing tax credit money, which basically, from what I can gather, comes basically from banks and investment insurance companies. Instead of paying those big amounts to the IRS, they can invest it in low-income housing. And they get the low-income housing credit back when, at the end of 15 years, which the low-income housing tax credit money is good for, whoever the nonprofit is, from what I can gather, but I can't get any, like I say, this is what I can deduce. They start another nonprofit and sell it again to the low-income housing tax credit money, and the bank gets their interest back because of the appreciation of the building. But my point is, are we buying that building again?
Good point.
Yeah. Well, there's a place in Plainfield, the old schoolhouse there, where I went to school. I'm not sure what happened there. Morse Block in Barry. They sold that for $10,200 to Morse Block Associates, who was a subsidiary of the Vermont State Housing Authority over here on Prospect Street, or the street going up to Northfield. And then after, I don't know, quite a few years, they sold that. As I remember, Morse Block bought it for $10,200 at a foreclosure sale with HUD. I think it was $10,200. Property transfer tax records don't lie. They're in Barry. And then they sold it for, I don't know, I think it was $331,000 to possibly, it was Vermont Enterprises, who was also a subsidiary of the Vermont State Housing Authority. And since then, Morse Block Estates dissolved. Vermont Enterprises or Vermont Foundation or whatever they were. I haven't got that stuff. I don't get paid to do this. And they sold it again to somebody else, and they dissolved. Morse Block Estates dissolved. And from what I can gather, we, the taxpayer, bought it again. How many times do you got to keep buying these buildings with our taxpayer money? I don't know. I'm not sure on this. I could be totally wrong, but people, I can't, since I've been doing this so long, I'm so used to having to try and get 2 and 3 different answers because I feel they're giving me false information. So I can be discredited, just like I could be here. But I've just had enough of this. Here we are. Wouldn't you like a mortgage? 30-year balloon payment, and then they refinance it after 30 years. Oh, and then back then they were 2% interest. And then now, first note modification agreement. What they're doing is they're changing the interest on these loans to 0%, and I can't get an answer on this because I think the interest was supposed to be paid back. You couldn't refinance the interest. And then from what I can gather here, VHCB won't answer the questions. They've told me anytime I want information now, they're gonna have to bill me for it because it takes time to look it up. And I said, get out of here. You got all these computers, you should be able to get this. But this one here, I think it says there's $520,000. And it just, nope, you'll just go ask the taxpayer for more money. And I'm getting sick and tired of it because I'm a Vermonter like most of you there where I ain't got enough money to get out of town. And I guess we're running out of time, and we got a box over here with more stuff. We're gonna do some more shows as we dig out more stuff for you.